Do you dream of writing a novel? When you feel the urgency to write a novel, you aren't making it up. When that urgency won't let go, there's a reason. Turn your readers into raving fans. Reveal the power of your voice and your story. Writing is an act of courage, and you have what it takes. How to Write a Novel That Sells by Lana McAra will take you across the finish line. Visit howtowriteanovelthatsells.net and take that powerful next step now.
Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana McAra, where you will discover tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Here you'll find new energy, new perspectives, new resources, and new ideas that will spark your creativity into a blaze of brilliance. It's easier than you think. Be sure you visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com. While you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, get out your notebook, tune in, and let's get started.
What do you think about romance? And what do you think about later life romance? That's what we're going to be talking about today. Welcome to the Fiction Writers Podcast, tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Today, I'm delighted to welcome to the podcast Leslie J. Wyatt. She crafts romance novels that celebrate love in later years. She creates immersive worlds filled with true colors, flawed but lovable characters where wishes come true. A professional writer since 1997, Leslie's work spans romance, historical novels for young readers, and nonfiction. In addition to her romance novel, All of Me, coming out with Sibylline Digital First, and When I'm 64, she has published over 1,000 pieces, including articles, profiles, and essays. Her work has appeared in Romance Writers Report, Cup of Comfort, and Children's Writer Guides. Leslie presents at literature festivals, writing conferences, workshops, writing-related podcasts, and events. You can find her online at lesliejwyatt.com or on social media and the sign at Leslie J. Wyatt. And also at Art for the Rest of Us. Sorry about that. Art for the Rest of Us. When not writing, she enjoys camping with her husband and marveling at the countless stars in the night sky and finding inspiration for her next story in the beauty of the wilderness. Welcome, Leslie.
Thank you, Lana. Great to be here.
Where are you located?
Redding, California. So Northern California, just about an hour south of the Oregon border.
Okay. I just moved from Arizona. Well, I say I just moved. 2 years ago, I moved from Arizona. And the night skies there were absolutely incredible.
Oh, I can imagine.
Out in the desert. And they had a dark night like law where you had to put a hood on your porch light so it only shone down. So the sky was completely dark, and it was breathtaking.
Oh, I love that.
Yes. Well, I'm excited for our conversation today because there are so many parallels. I can't even begin to tell you. I don't want to take up the whole podcast with me talking about all the parallels, but wow, there are so many. Starting off with the romance books, which is where I started. And romance books make billions of dollars. The readers are so absolutely obsessed. And yet the literary world doesn't take us seriously. So
I know.
What do you
What's
think?
up with that?
Yeah.
I know. I'm actually a relative newcomer to writing romance, but I will say a late comer to reading it, mostly due to that, I guess, stigma that romance has had, or somehow I think it's all steamy and gratuitous or something, you know? But like you say, it makes billions of dollars. It's actually and the last statistic I have is from May 2022 to 23, because 24 is not out yet. For the last 3 years, that revenues have jumped, and right now it is the leading fiction revenue producer, almost twice what the next category is. So that's pretty impressive.
Yes, yes. And it needs to be said that there are different types of romance books. There's erotica,
right?
You know what that is. There are the bodice rippers, which, you know, we know what that is too. And then there is sweet romance. Yes. And then there's kind of family.
Exactly. I recently wrote an article about the different levels of heat in romance, you know, going from sweet to steamy and, you know, in between there. And I write all on the sweet side. So, but yeah, I think those, the erotica, the bodice rippers is all kind of contributed to this sort of, stigma of romance when there's quite a bit more to the genre, as you know.
Yes, absolutely. There is. And I started out with sweet romance. I was writing for a Christian publisher. They didn't even let you put in body part. You couldn't say he put his hand on her arm.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would imagine. And it, you know, I mean, there is a diverse readership. And so, you know, we write what we're comfortable with. We write what we're comfortable reading mostly. So, yeah.
Yes, I started out reading Harlequin romances back in the early 70s when they were clean.
Mm-hmm.
And so that got me started. And then, of course, I always loved mysteries. So I was writing romantic mysteries. And although I was writing for a romance line, all my books had a mystery in them.
I love that.
Yeah, yeah. So how did you get started in romance?
Well, it's kind of a fun story because, as you mentioned in my bio, I've written for children and adult nonfiction, children historical fiction, stories and articles and whatever. And I have 3 historical middle grade novels out. And I love that. But and I was in the middle, and I still have it, which I still will eventually send in. I was working on a fantasy for middle graders. It had a race of small people and a princess, and, you know, I still really love the story, but I was kind of bummed down. I can be a little OCD in my editing. And so my oldest daughter, who is also kind of my writing buddy forever, that's what we call each other, WBS, she's a professional writer as well. She said, well, Mom, why don't you try a different genre? You know, and she sent me some prompts. And so, you know, one was The Color Blue, one was something else, and I can't even remember the other. And I thought, you know, I'll just do this because I want something fresh. And I started, and it was a blast. I had so much fun. So much fun. And actually, that is the book that is When I'm 64, that is coming out at the end of February, or actually beginning of February, the 7th. So that I had such a blast. I'm like, oh my gosh, why would I do all this other stuff, you know? Because all the research takes so much time. And I do love learning, and I love history and such, but this is set in contemporary times and with older protagonists. So, you know, I didn't have to make up much, you know, just had to not copy any people I know or me, and just, you know, kind of let it riff. And so, yeah, that's how I kind of got going with the romances.
Okay. Wow. That is really interesting. I love to hear how people's lives kind of meander through different places and how you end up.
Exactly. In fact, you know, when there was a block of time, I would say in the 2000s, up to maybe 2012 or so, where I was doing a lot of articles. I wrote for Hobby Farm. So I was doing a lot of instant expert stuff like grazing genetics in sheep and, this and that and the other. And because I grew up on a farm or on a ranch, that's why I got into that. I was interested in a lot of that and, kind of had a basic knowledge of a lot of farm life. But that's a lot of research, basically, and sourcing and such to write that level for magazines. So, yeah, I'm kind of loving the fiction writing world now.
Mm.
Where I could kind of make up my own world, make up my own setting. I don't even have to set it in a real town, or anything like that, unless I want to. But
Yes, I'm with you. I do have the big towns are real, but the small town where that people live, not real.
exactly. That's kind of what I've done too.
How would you say that the genre has evolved since I was doing Harlequin back in the 70s?
Yes. Well, I thought about that. I realized, I don't have a huge background in either the reading or the knowledge. So I tapped ChatGPT to give us some thoughts.
Okay.
And here's what we found. In especially the last 40 years, romance has evolved in some key ways. I want to get to, if we have time, there's a little blip on readership, which I found was really interesting, the changing landscape of readership as new generations get to that point. But one of the major differences now is the diversity and representation in books, and the focus on emotional depth and realism. Now, I can't speak from a long history, like I said, of reading those earlier romances, but there is a sort of a genre hybridity, if you would, where they're just stick right in, normal or historical formulas that you would think of, but more like crossing over or combining of. There's, and I love this part, much more emphasis on consent and healthy relationships, less about, overpowering and that whole thing. I mean, there are notable exceptions, and I don't like those books at all. But as a genre as a whole is seems to be moving away from those questionable ethics, and that's great. Rise of various types of romance, and gender fluidity in those. New storytelling platforms are also part of that, and I don't know a whole lot about that, except that sometimes they, will serialize something on one of the social medias or whatever, or put the first part out and then, go to the other. There is still kind of a desire to like step out of our normal world and into something else, but we're seeing more of a modern twist. Like, it's not like, I mean, historical romances are still amazing and loved, but there is a whole part of having a modern twist to it, even sci-fis and aliens and you name it, So that's what I've discovered.
Yes, I've been lately exploring some of the older TV shows that were back in the 70s and 60s. And I have been astounded at the difference in the morality and the ethics of the time.
I have been the same. I'm like, we grew up with this?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and I will say that's something that I think is starting to change in the landscape, but it's slow in some ways. And as going back to the emerging readership, they're the generation that has more grown up with these better ethics, And so they're really not interested in those. In fact, they're offended by it, and rightly so.
Yes.
Those more stereotyped roles and treatment of women and power dynamics. So they're really wanting stories that are that reflect their values of inclusivity, authenticity, empowerment of women and men, not to the disempowerment of men. That's not good either. But there's a whole, I don't know if it's, I get these generations mixed up, Gen X and millennials, that they're really driving, if you will, the romance industry to give more vibrant and relevant material, which is great, because we really need to see that shift. That's part of, I think, why romances maybe have this strange presence or a strange stigma for how people look at it, and yet the numbers of readers, the revenue and the readers don't really back that up, that it's light reading and that it's not, that it's just fluff. So
Right. Yes, I'm with you. I'm tracking with you on that, because I find that the early days, the 60s, 70s, 80s romances were just so archaic in the culture. And now, back in those days, I was newly married with small children, and I didn't think anything of it.
I don't want to steeped in it, actually. You were steeped in it. I'm appalled. I mean, so I, like you, have picked up a few of the older, like, TV shows or movies, and specifically one I watched it. I thought, and I thought this was good. This is really not that good. And I'm like, wow, no wonder we are still trying to sort these things out in this day and age. It's like,
yes, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about one of the accusations of the people that look down on romance is that they're formulaic. And back in the day, there was always a man who was in his early 30s, a girl who was in her late teens, early 20s, and there was some formula feel to it. I used to say, boy gets girl, boy loses girl, and boy gets her back. That was basically the formula.
Basically.
We'll address that.
Yeah, I think the truth of the matter is that there are formulas in every genre. I mean, mysteries have genres, that, different than romantic tropes, but they have tropes. It's not, I mean, because, and I don't think that's a bad thing at all. And here's why: because readers come to certain books, they come to genres for what they're going to get out of it. Now, if I read, say, a mystery, I want a mystery. I want to try to figure this out and have the red herrings and have the clues and, be led here, there, and everywhere. But my expectation is that by the end of the book, I'm going to know what really happened. Now, that's formula. I mean, that is a formula. Romance is very clear, like you say, boy meets girl or girl meets boy. They go through their character arcs, they lose their happily ever after in the moment, and they have to come back and win it one way or another to a more wholehearted place. When you pick up a romance book, when anybody picks up a romance book on purpose, they want the happily ever after. They know that's where it's going. That's not a problem. What's a problem is if they don't get their happily ever after, or if it's so much of a happily for now that it doesn't feel happy. Because if I want to read something that, is thought well, is kind of leaves my heart wishing for a better world, I'll find book genre, you know? I'm not going to go, I'm going to be disappointed. Let's just put that. I'll be disappointed if I pick up a romance and I don't get a happily ever after out of that. Now, I think within the formulas, I think that's a challenge for writers. We've got to make it fresh. You know, it's like same with, you know, tropes within genres. They're there because they're proven and readers love them because it's like it gives us a little structure to feel comfortable with in midst of a story we know nothing about. But we don't want to be bored, and we don't want it to be predictable. You know, when it gets that way, then we just look for a different book. So our challenge as writers is to take a trope or a whatever and kind of turn it sideways or do it in such a way that it feels fresh. But one of my favorite writers of romance, Catherine Center, I think I will probably butcher the quote, but you don't, how to say, when we are reading a romance, we want to have happily ever after. If there is a surprise ending, that's not a happily ever after, because we don't want to be surprised on that ending. We want it, you know, now maybe they may do it in a fresh way. You know, maybe they'll do it at the top of the Golden Gate Bridge, you know, have their final declaration or whatever, but it can't be like all of a sudden the hero dies and the heroine ends up with somebody else. That's not our happily ever after. So within keeping it fresh, it still needs to stay within the formula. Yeah, but I think what's a little off-putting to me is that people will say that about romances, but they don't say that about the other genres. But it's equally as true. Thrillers, you know, whatever, you know, I think it works for us as people. We just don't want to be bored. So there's always that caveat.
Right. Just think about action movies. They're very much similar.
Very, very. And screenwriters probably are the worst formulaic writer, not worse, the most formulaic writers there are, because they know what sells. So they do it. And what do you know? We go to the movies. You know, it's like, because we really want to be taken on a journey that doesn't feel so out there that we end up uncertain. You know, we want to be taken on an uncertain journey of certainty, if you will. You know, it's like it's kind of a strange dichotomy there.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit more about the male-female thing here. When men write romance, it's called something else.
I know. Isn't that ridiculous? I am like one of the least political people you will run across in normal life, and certainly not somebody that's going to place my soapbox on a corner and just go to town on it. However, that inequality really, really kind of fries me, because it's not based on literary merit. Now, granted that, you know, there are great women writers and great men writers. I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about what you referenced, which is, strangely enough, male writers can write romances or have all the elements of romances and somehow get shoved in the literary fiction section, whereas women writers that write with all the same thing about, you know, emotional journeys and family and this and that are all, they get put in the romance. And to me, I know there's nuance, so we can't just say, okay, well, there's just this black and white inequality that if you're a man and you write something romantic, you get to be here and women have to stay here. But the truth is there is a bias. And Jane Austen faced her own level of it when she started writing, because at that point they didn't even think women should be writing fiction, at least. And hers were, yes, romances, but it wasn't about the romance at that point. It was about fact that she was writing as a woman, and her compatriots and stuff, they all face that. And it's similar. Sad to say, all these centuries later, women are still dealing with that level of inequality. And I don't feel like I'm the best authority on this because I haven't read all the books that are referenced as literary fiction that are really just men writing about sexual relationships and emotions and family and whatever. So in one way, it's like, take this with a grain of salt, but I think it is the vestige of discrimination, and it needs to change. And part of the way we can get that to change is by talking about it, by writing about it, by readers, challenging obviously there's some branches of romantic fiction that is not literary fiction. Maybe they're a fun read, whatever, but they maybe aren't dealing with the deeper issues that get classed as romantic fiction or as literary fiction. But a lot of them are, and they're still shelved in the romance because they're not either a very high selling name as if they're a female, or they're not male. Now, I know that's a sweeping statement, and I'm sure that we could find the exceptions. But as a whole, it's a problem. I see it as a problem.
Yes. So Nicholas Sparks, he has a sad ending at every turn, but his books are so heavily filled with romance. They really are deep romances. But I don't think he's classified as is he classified as a romance writer or
no? He's classified as literary fiction.
Literary,
and yeah, which to me is really strange because, for one thing, he has some definite romantic tropes. I mean, to the point where some of the ones that you don't really want and that aren't really that, if you want to say politically correct now, the whole, perfect man making this all work, the manic pixie dream boy thing. And, heavily romantic, dealing with real issues, grief and so on. But those same elements are in many very good romance writers, women romance writers, and they're not shelved there. Now, I'm not an expert on Nicholas Sparks or his writing, and I know he has other books, that aren't, like, I'm thinking, he had The Notebook that was such a big success and whatever, and that got shelved into literary fiction, and he, as I understand it, he wouldn't classify himself as a romance writer. He would say, no, I'm a literary fiction writer. But literally, if you look at it, somebody else's, he put a girl's name on the cover. I just kind of, and nobody had heard the story. I just wonder. I mean, that's me, and I'm not, I don't want to be too incorrect, and I don't want to be too gender biased toward women, but there is really quite a disparity, and it's too bad. I think historically, romance novels were thought to deal with only women's issues or women's landscapes, if you will. But that in itself is problematic to me, that would not be considered literary material just because women are, because that's half of our population, roughly. It's their literary landscape. It's their emotional landscape. And why would the other half of the population sideline that as less important than men's literary or emotional landscape? I just find that deeply problematic on many levels. And I think seeing the trends in romance now, some of those are being, the actual content of the books are being more championed, I believe. But I think we've got a ways to go, because that's, you know, I don't really like to get too hot under the collar about these things, but I could, because they're really not fair. I mean, I know life's not fair, but that's something that I think we need to keep working about to equalize, because it's sort of a, as in many of the racial and gender issues that we face in our world, there is this weird backhanded, I would say, bias that sort of wants to give a group priority because they are that group. But that's sort of like saying they can't earn it on their own merit. And I am not in any way advocating that women romance writers should be automatically shelved with literary fiction, only if their writing fits that. But by the same token, neither should men writing romances be automatically shelved in the literary fiction if their writing doesn't stand up to whatever criteria is needed for that classification. So that's what I have to say.
Yes. And basically, just boiling it down, just classify everything the same. If it has criteria, then
Exactly.
let's just be the same. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, I know this probably can never happen, but it feels like it would be much more fair if you did like the blind contest, where you take out the author's name, so you don't know who's writing this.
Mm-hmm.
Then evaluate on the merit of the writing itself, and then add the name back in at the end after the awards are given, or the categorization is given. To me, that's equal.
Yes, exactly. Yes. So do you think romance readers have better grasp of what is a healthy relationship?
Actually, I've been doing some research, and it is fascinating. Some very well documented research, which of course I space out at the moment for the exact references, but studies. And what they found some neuroscience. There's some neuroscience studies. One being that, there's a study there that shows that reading fiction, uplifting fiction, not, kind of whatever you would call it, actually does lower stress hormones, so lowers cortisol levels in readers. And in that same study, they also studied younger readers and showed that reading about social situations in which there was a clear arc to a corrective or a better way to be, showed interaction with society on a higher level. So that was good. But a very telling statistic is when they measured the actual things happening in your brain, only romance reading changed the TOM performance, which is theory of mind equals empathy. So
wow,
I know. So they actually show that romance writers in their study group, and they have all their controls and everything, romance reading of these type that we've talked about, that really show emotional growth in their characters, that it's not about just, the physical, it's about the relationships and the vulnerability that builds and the truthfulness in those relationships. Those showed a measurable difference in the empathy level of the readers to those that were reading controlled books of different genres. I found that fascinating. So, and there are studies done where mental health practitioners are starting to incorporate romances in their practice for PTSD sufferers, those that have had relational trauma, because of that very predictable happy ending. It helps them know that the world can actually turn out safely that it doesn't always have to be what they've experienced. And they've shown that there is a measurable help in reading romances that take the readers over those constructive arcs to a better relationship in the end.
Wow, that is really interesting. I never
So
considered
too.
that. Happy ever after does matter.
It does. See, that's the thing. And I think a lot of times, whether it's the too fluffy in the literature world or just, our tendency to not want to be vulnerable, to want to admit that, you know what, that's all what we're all about. We don't want to see the next apocalypse or an apocalypse. We don't want, San Francisco to fall off into the ocean. We don't want aliens to invade. What we want is to find that spot where we're loved and we can love and we feel safe in that place. I think I'd be surprised if you could find a person on the earth that in their very heart doesn't want that, just pure and simple, to be loved safely and to love. That's a happily ever after. And I think it matters tremendously in our world, especially in our world now where, so much is in flux and, we need love more than ever. And, I think readers know, obviously, that sex isn't love. And that's why these books that are really dealing with the more nuanced and layered relationships and I mean, there's a lot right now in the diversity of even neurodivergent and various things that are helping people just see each other for the brilliance that they are. For all our complexity, we are human and we really just want to love and be loved. And I love that.
I do too. I'm so glad you brought that out. That is amazing. I have been saying for years when I'm speaking that fiction changes people.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're telling me here is there is a powerful force for good in what we're doing. Wow.
Exactly. I'd love that. And so for writers, to me, that's exciting as a writer because that means that, and this is, of course, the core of why I'm even writing romance before I knew the research is that, by the time you reach, your 60s, hopefully you've learned some things and probably most of them the hard way. And you're not wanting to repeat that. You want to pass on anything helpful that you've learned. And so if we can craft stories that save other people or generations, can see readers reinventing the wheel for themselves and show them relationships and show them real key truths about life. I mean, that's exciting.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Wow. Leslie, this has been amazing. So
But like I'm running off at the mouth, so I
don't know. This has been terrific. I'm so glad our paths crossed. Yeah. So
Yes,
tell
me
us how to
too.
get more.
Say that again. I'm sorry.
Tell us how to get more from you.
Aha. Well, you can contact me through my website, lesliejwyatt.com. It has a contact form or page. And I am thrilled to receive requests and various things. I'm on Instagram at lesliejwyatt. And I'm a self-professed terrible social media person. But I do answer emails pretty well. So people, I would love to hear what people what things interest them in romance, like what themes, would they like to read about? Or if they read my books, what did they like? Or what did they wish that I'd done that I didn't do, or any of those things? My books, All of Me is the first one that came out. It came out right at the end of December, and it's on Amazon. And then When I'm 64 comes out February 7th. And I've got a couple more in the works that I'm in the revision process with. So that's pretty fun. I also have articles published in Romance Writers Report, but I kind of think you got to be a member, so that might not work for people. But if my website, probably the easiest, or direct message me on Instagram.
Yes, very good. And all that will be in the show notes. The link to your website and everything will be in the show notes. So yes. And if you're listening today and you're not subscribed and you haven't become, subscribed on YouTube or whatever platform you're listening to, please do that. Please do that and help us out, because we are wanting the numbers. We need the numbers. Although we appreciate you as an individual, we also need numbers for the podcast to grow. So thank you so much, Leslie, for being with us today. I really appreciate you more than I can say.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, Lana. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. And thank you for being with us today. See you next time. Bye now.
Thank you for tuning into the Fiction Writers Podcast with Lana McAra, where we share tips, tricks, and ideas for fiction that is #unputdownable. Remember to visit our website at www.fictionwriterspodcast.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on the Fiction Writers Podcast.